The lights inside the grand ballroom of the Crystal Tower sparkled like 1,000 tiny stars. Every corner was dressed in gold, and the tables were lined with the finest crystal glasses. It was the annual gala of the Westworth family, one of the most powerful and wealthy families in the country. The event was not just a celebration, but a stage where power, money, and influence were displayed like jewels. Among the guests, a woman walked with quiet confidence. Her name was Amara Lewis, the young CEO of Novatech, a rising technology company that had changed the market with its bold ideas. Amara was elegant in her simple black gown, her hair neatly styled, her face calm and strong. Unlike many in the room who were born into wealth, she had built her company with her own hard work, long nights, and countless sacrifices. Many whispered as she passed by. Some admired her, others were curious, and a few looked at her with hidden doubt. In a world still ruled by old traditions and powerful families, Amara stood out. She was young, she was independent, and she was different. The billion-dollar deal between Novatech and the Westworth family's empire was the main reason she was invited to the gala. If signed, the deal would not only make Novatech stronger but also change Amara's place in the world of business. Yet deep in her heart, she knew something more important was being tested that night: her dignity. As the evening went on, conversations flowed with music and laughter. Amara found herself standing near the grand staircase where she was introduced to Charles Westworth, the head of the family, along with his sons and daughters. Their wealth was visible in every detail of their clothing, their jewelry, and even in the way they spoke. Charles gave her a polite smile, though his eyes carried a sense of pride that seemed to measure her. "So you are the one we've heard so much about," he said. Amara nodded with grace. "Yes. I lead Novatech. I believe our partnership could be valuable for both sides." His son, Daniel, laughed lightly. Impressive, for someone so new to this world. Amara kept her calm. She had heard such comments before. "Innovation often comes from those who are not afraid to begin new things," she replied gently. Some around them chuckled. Some looked uncomfortable. It was clear that her presence was both surprising and challenging to the family's pride. As the evening continued, Amara noticed how some members of the family spoke to her with subtle disrespect, small words, sharp tones, glances that seemed to question whether she truly belonged there. She smiled, answered with patience, and reminded herself that she was not there to seek their approval. She was there because her work had earned her place. At one point, during the dinner, the conversation turned toward the upcoming deal. Charles raised his glass and said loudly, "We believe Novatech has potential. But let us be honest, without our name and power, it would be difficult for such a company to rise." The words fell heavy in the room. Some guests clapped politely, others remained silent. Amara felt the sting of humiliation, but she did not let it break her. She looked at Charles calmly and replied, respectfully, "Mr. Westworth, Novatech was built before this deal was ever discussed. Our strength comes from vision, not from borrowed names." The table grew quiet. For a moment, no one moved. Then Charles gave a forced smile and lifted his glass again. "Strong words. Let us see if they hold in business." The dinner continued, but the air around Amara felt heavier. She noticed how certain family members whispered to each other, how their eyes sometimes narrowed at her. She knew they expected her to bend, to quietly accept their pride as part of the deal. But deep inside, she also knew that her value was not something for them to decide. By the end of the night, as music played and couples danced under the grand chandelier, Amara stood near the tall glass windows overlooking the city lights. Her mind was calm, though her heart carried weight. She thought of the journey that brought her there, the long nights, the failures, the small victories, the people who had believed in her vision. And as she stood there, she realized something important: a billion-dollar deal meant nothing if it cost her self-respect. The gala was supposed to be a celebration of partnership. Instead, it was slowly becoming a test of her dignity. Amara's eyes wandered across the ballroom. Laughter, pride, and wealth surrounded her, but she felt a growing distance from it all. She knew the next steps she would take could change everything, not just for her company, but for her own soul. The night was not over, but a quiet storm was already rising in her heart. The night at the Crystal Tower stretched on with music and bright lights, yet Amara Lewis felt a quiet storm building within her heart. She stood by the window, looking at the city shining below, when a voice called her name. "Miss Lewis," said a woman with sharp eyes and an expensive silver gown. It was Eleanor Westworth, Charles's eldest daughter. "I hope you are enjoying our gala." Amara turned and smiled politely. "It's a beautiful evening. Thank you for hosting." Eleanor's smile was thin, almost forced. "It is rare to see someone like you in this room. My family usually partners with those who share our traditions." Her tone was soft, but the meaning behind the words was clear. Amara stayed calm. She had learned long ago not to let such words pierce her spirit. "Tradition is important," she replied, "but so is progress. Sometimes, new paths bring more light than old ones." Eleanor tilted her head, studying Amara as though she were an unusual painting. "We'll see if your path can carry the weight of $1 billion deal." With that, she walked away, her gown sweeping across the marble floor. Amara's smile faded. She knew she had not been invited to the gala simply to celebrate. She was being measured, tested, and perhaps even challenged. Moments later, Daniel Westworth, Charles's son, approached her with a glass of wine in his hand. His voice was casual, but his eyes carried amusement. "So, Amara, tell me, do you really think Novatech can survive without our family's power? Business is war, and only the strongest survive." Amara met his gaze without fear. "Business is not war, Daniel. It is about vision, trust, and the courage to build something lasting. Novatech has already proven that strength comes from ideas, not from intimidation." Her calm reply caught him off guard. For a second, Daniel seemed unsure of what to say. Then he smirked and walked away, leaving her standing alone again. Across the hall, Amara noticed several guests whispering and glancing in her direction. She could almost feel the weight of their curiosity. To them, she was an outsider in this glittering world. Yet she reminded herself quietly, "I am not here to fit into their world. I am here because I created my own." Later, Charles Westworth raised his hand and called for attention. The music softened, and the crowd turned toward him. He stood under the grand chandelier, his voice steady and filled with pride. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "tonight we celebrate not only family but also the possibility of new partnerships. As you know, our empire stands on tradition, power, and success. We are considering a collaboration with Novatech, a young company led by Miss Amara Lewis. But before we commit, we must be certain she understands the responsibilities of joining our world." The words hung in the air like heavy stones. Amara felt the eyes of the entire ballroom upon her. Charles looked directly at her. "Miss Lewis, perhaps you would like to say something to our guests? Tell us why you believe Novatech deserves to stand alongside the Westworth legacy." A hush fell over the room. This was not a polite invitation, it was a test. Amara knew that every word she spoke would be judged. She stepped forward, her black gown flowing around her like a river of calm strength. Taking a deep breath, she began, "Thank you, Mr. Westworth. Novatech was born not from privilege, but from persistence. We started with nothing, just ideas, sleepless nights, and a belief that technology can serve people, not just profit. We have grown because we stayed true to our vision, and because we respect those who trust us. Partnership, to me, is not about one side standing above the other. It is about walking together toward a future that benefits everyone." Her voice was steady, clear, and filled with quiet power. Some guests nodded, others remained silent. But Amara could see that her words carried weight, even among those who doubted her. Charles raised his eyebrow, as if surprised by her confidence. He gave a slow, measured clap, and the room followed with polite applause. Yet behind his smile, Amara sensed something else, perhaps irritation, perhaps challenge. As the music returned and the crowd dispersed into smaller conversations, Amara walked back toward the window. She could still hear faint whispers, some admiring, some doubting. But in her heart, she felt a quiet pride. She had spoken her truth, and she had not bowed to anyone's pride. Just then, an older gentleman, not from the Westworth family but a respected guest, approached her. His voice was kind. "Miss Lewis, I was deeply moved by your words. It takes courage to stand in this room and speak with such honesty. Never forget, true power comes from integrity." Amara smiled warmly. "Thank you, sir. I believe the same." Yet as the evening stretched on, Amara also felt a shift in the atmosphere. The Westworth family, though polite, seemed colder toward her. Their smiles were thinner, their words sharper, as if her refusal to bend had unsettled them. Still, Amara knew one thing with absolute clarity: no deal, no matter how large, was worth losing her self-respect. The night was not yet over, but her heart had already chosen its path. The music inside the Crystal Tower ballroom grew louder, yet Amara Lewis felt the silence of distance around her. The gala was filled with bright chandeliers, polished marble, and laughter, but behind the golden beauty, she sensed invisible walls being built. After her speech earlier, the atmosphere had shifted. Some guests approached her with warm smiles and gentle praise, but many from the Westworth family seemed unsettled. Their polite expressions could not hide the coldness in their eyes. Amara stood near the long table lined with silver plates and delicate glasses. She picked up a glass of sparkling water, her thoughts racing. Why does dignity always feel like a test in places like this? Soon, Charles Westworth himself approached her. His tall figure carried authority, and his voice was smooth but heavy with meaning. "Miss Lewis," he said, "your words were strong tonight. But remember, strength is often misunderstood as pride. Our family values humility in partners." Amara looked at him calmly. "Humility is important, Mr. Westworth. But so is respect. True partnership cannot exist without both." For a brief second, their eyes locked. Charles's smile faded just slightly before he turned away, leaving Amara standing with her thoughts. Not long after, Daniel Westworth reappeared, this time with two of his cousins beside him. Their laughter was low and sharp, the kind that carries hidden judgment. "You spoke well earlier," Daniel said, "but words are not enough. My father's name carries weight across the world. Can you carry such weight without bending under it?" Amara's voice was steady. "I do not carry weight by bending. I carry it by standing." The cousins chuckled quietly, but Daniel only stared at her for a moment before walking away. The small exchanges through the night reminded Amara of battles she had faced before. Every time she had entered a boardroom filled with doubt, every time her ideas were brushed aside, every time she had to prove herself twice as much as others, those moments had prepared her for this gala. Yet something about tonight felt different. The eyes watching her were not just questioning her company. They were questioning her very right to be there. Later in the evening, as the music softened for a slower dance, Eleanor Westworth took the floor with grace. The crowd admired her presence, her elegance, and her control. When she returned, she walked past Amara with a faint smile. "Appearances matter, Miss Lewis. In business, sometimes appearances mean more than truth." Amara did not answer. She only watched Eleanor walk away, her words echoing in her heart. If appearances matter more than truth, then what is the value of this partnership? Standing once again by the window, Amara let her eyes rest on the city lights outside. Each small glow reminded her of the people who had believed in her, the team who had built Novatech beside her, and the countless customers whose trust was her company's greatest treasure. She realized that her responsibility was not just to herself, but to them. As she thought, a kind hand touched her shoulder. It was the same older gentleman who had spoken to her earlier. "Miss Lewis," he said gently, "do not let this room make you forget your worth. Sometimes wealth hides insecurity. And sometimes, dignity shines brighter than diamonds." Amara smiled softly, grateful for his words. "Thank you. I needed to hear that." Meanwhile, at the far end of the room, Charles spoke quietly with his family. Their expressions were serious, their voices low but filled with tension. It was clear they were discussing her, weighing her, and deciding how far they could push. Soon after, one of the younger cousins approached Amara with a forced smile. "Miss Lewis," he said, "our family has always chosen partners who know how to adjust themselves. Do you think you can adjust?" Amara tilted her head slightly, her calm never breaking. "If by adjust you mean lose myself, then no. But if you mean grow stronger together, then yes." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of her spirit. The cousin gave a short laugh and walked away, but Amara could feel the test deepening. It was no longer about the billion-dollar deal. It was about whether she would bow to their pride or walk away with her head high. By the time dessert was served, Amara knew the truth in her heart. The Westworth family wanted more than a business partner. They wanted control, submission, and silence. And none of those belonged to her spirit. As the orchestra played its final song of the evening, Amara stood tall in the middle of the ballroom. She looked around at the chandeliers, the polished marble, the glittering gowns, and the proud faces. And then she thought of her own journey, her sacrifices, and the dreams of those who had built Novatech with her. She knew the choice she would soon make. The gala was coming to its end, but for Amara, the real ending and the real beginning was still ahead. The chandeliers of the Crystal Tower glowed softly as the gala entered its final hours. Guests danced and laughed, glasses clinked, and music filled the air. Yet for Amara Lewis, the beauty of the ballroom no longer shined. What she felt most strongly was the weight of eyes, the constant test of her dignity. She walked slowly toward the edge of the hall, where the air was quieter. Her heart was steady, but her mind was restless. Every word spoken to her that night replayed in her memory the hints, the doubt, the cold smiles. She knew that this evening was not about celebration. It was about control. Charles Westworth called for attention again. His deep voice filled the room as the orchestra fell silent. "My friends," he began, "tonight has been an evening of joy and future possibilities. We stand at the edge of a great decision, one that could shape our family's empire for decades to come. Novatech is an option we consider. But before such a partnership, we must be certain that those we stand beside share our values." Amara listened carefully. His words carried charm, but beneath them was a question directed straight at her. "Do you belong in our world? Will you bend to it?" Charles gestured toward her with a gracious smile. "Miss Lewis, perhaps you would join us here, so our guests may hear your thoughts one more time." The crowd turned. Amara felt the spotlight again, bright and heavy. She walked to the front, her black gown brushing the marble floor, her steps measured and calm. When she stood beside Charles, he leaned closer and said softly, "Remember, appearances matter tonight." Amara nodded politely, though her spirit rose with quiet fire. She faced the room of glittering eyes and began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, Novatech was created with one belief, that innovation can bring light into people's lives. We are not a company of old power, but of new ideas. We believe in trust, respect, and progress. To us, partnership is not about pride, but about purpose." Her voice was steady, clear, and filled with truth. Some nodded. Some whispered. And some, especially among the Westworth family, exchanged looks of quiet disapproval. Then Eleanor Westworth stepped forward. Her silver gown shimmered, and her smile was graceful yet sharp. "Strong words, Miss Lewis. But in this family, we believe respect is shown by knowing one's place. Do you?" The question cut through the room like cold glass. Many guests looked uneasy. Some leaned closer, waiting for Amara's response. Amara paused, her calm never breaking. She looked at Eleanor with kindness, not anger. Respect is never about lowering one's place. It is about standing side by side, equal in dignity. The silence that followed was deep. The crowd shifted, whispers spread. Some smiled quietly at Amara's courage, while others frowned at her refusal to bow. Charles cleared his throat, his smile a little tighter now. "You speak well, Miss Lewis. But remember, this is not just about vision. It is about legacy. Our family carries a name that has shaped history. To join us, one must understand the weight of that name." Amara looked at him steadily. Legacy is not carried by names alone. It is carried by actions. By how we treat others. By the respect we give and the respect we keep. The ballroom grew even quieter. For a moment, the music seemed distant, as if the entire room held its breath. Amara knew then, with clarity, that she stood at a crossroad. She could choose to bend, to sign the billion-dollar deal and gain power at the cost of her self-respect. Or she could walk away, holding her dignity even if it meant losing everything she had worked for that night. Her thoughts turned to the faces of her team back at Novatech, the people who had believed in her leadership. She remembered their dedication, their trust, their faith in her vision. How can I return to them if I choose pride over respect? She asked herself. As the night reached its peak, Charles raised his glass for a final toast. To family, to tradition, and to the future that waits for us. Guests lifted their glasses. But Amara's hands remained still at her side. She looked around the glittering room one last time. She saw the chandeliers shining, the gowns sparkling, the proud faces watching. And she felt a deep truth in her heart: she did not belong to this room. Her place was with the people who built with hope, not with arrogance. Her place was with those who believed in equality, not hierarchy. Her place was in the future, not chained to the past. Taking a quiet breath, Amara turned away from the table. She walked gracefully toward the tall glass doors at the edge of the ballroom. Each step was calm, but inside, she knew she was walking toward a decision that would define her life. Guests noticed her movement. Murmurs filled the room. Some whispered in surprise, others in admiration. Charles's smile faltered as he watched her leave. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, but her lips curved in a thin smile, as if she had expected this. Amara did not look back. She pushed the doors open gently and stepped into the night air. The cool wind touched her face, and for the first time that evening, she felt free. The billion-dollar deal was behind her. Ahead was only the truth of her own worth. The night air outside the Crystal Tower was cool and quiet. Amara Lewis stepped out of the grand ballroom and onto the stone terrace, leaving behind the music, the chandeliers, and the judging eyes of the Westworth family. For the first time that evening, she breathed deeply. The city lights stretched far into the distance, glowing like 1,000 dreams waiting to be touched. Her heart beat steadily, but her mind was heavy with the decision she had just made. Walking away from the gala meant more than just leaving a party. It meant stepping away from a billion-dollar deal, a partnership that many in the business world had called the chance of a lifetime. Yet Amara felt no regret. Instead, she felt something far greater: peace. Still, doubts whispered at the edges of her thoughts. What will people say? Will investors question me? Will my company suffer because I refused the deal? She wrapped her arms gently around herself as the questions grew louder in her mind. But then she remembered the cold smiles, the sharp words, and the way her dignity had been tested again and again that night. She remembered how Charles and Eleanor had spoken about knowing one's place. And she reminded herself firmly, if I lose respect, I lose everything that truly matters. As she stood there, the older gentleman who had spoken kindly to her earlier in the evening stepped onto the terrace. His voice was warm and calm. "Miss Lewis," he said, "that was a brave decision." Amara turned to him with a small smile. "Sometimes bravery feels like loneliness." He nodded. "Yes, but loneliness in truth is better than company in falsehood. What you did tonight will not be forgotten. People saw. Some may not speak it, but they admired your courage." His words comforted her. She thanked him and watched as he returned inside, leaving her once again with the quiet night. Amara finally called for her car. As it arrived, she slid into the back seat and leaned her head against the window. The city rushed past in bright flashes of light, but her thoughts stayed at the gala. She thought of her team back at Novatech. She could already imagine the headlines: "Young CEO walks out on Westworth family deal." Some would praise her, some would criticize her. But she knew she had to face whatever came with the same strength she had carried that night. When she reached her apartment, the city had grown quieter. She removed her black gown, set her heels aside, and stood in front of the mirror. For a long moment, she simply looked at herself, not at her dress, not at her hair, but at the calm fire in her eyes. "This," she whispered softly to her reflection, "is who I am. And this is enough." The next morning, the world reacted. Newspapers carried the story, business channels replayed clips of her speech, and social media buzzed with her name. Some called her bold. Some called her foolish. Others called her inspiring. But no one ignored her. At Novatech headquarters, her team gathered around screens, reading the news with wide eyes. Some were worried. Some were proud. When Amara arrived, they all stood waiting. The office grew silent as she walked in, dressed simply in a navy suit, her face calm and steady. One of her managers, a young man named Luis, finally spoke. "Amara, is it true? You walked away from the deal?" Amara looked at her team, her voice gentle but strong. "Yes. I walked away because respect matters more than numbers. $1 billion is not worth it if we must lose who we are." For a moment, the room was silent. Then slowly, one by one, her team began to smile. Some clapped softly, others nodded with relief. They understood. Their leader had chosen them, their values, over power. Luis spoke again, his voice filled with admiration. "We trust you, Amara. If you believe this is the right path, then we stand with you." Her heart warmed at their words. She realized that Novatech was not just a company, it was a family built on trust and shared dreams. And unlike the Westworth family, this was a family that lifted each other up instead of pushing each other down. As the day went on, investors began calling. Some were worried about the future, but others were impressed by Amara's boldness. A few even hinted that they wanted to work with Novatech because she had shown such courage. By evening, Amara sat at her desk, looking out the tall windows at the city below. She felt the weight of uncertainty ahead, but also the strength of her decision. She whispered to herself, walking away was not the end. It was the beginning. And deep inside, she knew she was right. The path before her might not be easy, but it was hers, built not on borrowed names, but on her own truth. The gala was over, but the story of Amara Lewis was only just beginning. Days passed after the gala, but the echoes of Amara Lewis's decision still moved across the city. Newspapers, television programs, and business websites could not stop talking about her. Some called her the fearless CEO, while others said she had made the biggest mistake of her career. Amara read the headlines quietly, her face calm. She knew opinions would always be divided. What mattered most to her was not the noise outside, but the strength she carried inside. At Novatech headquarters, the atmosphere was mixed. Some employees were anxious. They worried that losing a billion-dollar deal meant the company would fall behind. But many others admired their leader more than ever. They had seen her walk into the grand ballroom of the Westworth family and leave with her dignity untouched. To them, that was worth more than any contract. One morning, Amara gathered her team in the main conference room. Sunlight streamed through the wide windows, and the air was filled with quiet expectation. "I know you have questions," she began, her voice steady. "And I know some of you feel uncertain about the future. But let me tell you this, Novatech was never built on borrowed power. We built this company with our own vision, and that is what will carry us forward." She paused, letting her words sink in. Her eyes moved across the faces of her team, reading their hopes and fears. "The deal we walked away from was large, yes," she continued, "but if we had accepted it, we would have lost something much greater: our respect. And without respect, no company can truly grow." Slowly, her words began to ease the tension in the room. Heads nodded, shoulders relaxed. A sense of quiet strength spread through the team. After the meeting, Luis approached her. "Amara," he said softly, "I've been at Novatech since the early days. I want you to know. I'm proud to work under a leader who values respect above everything. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Her heart warmed at his words. She smiled. "Thank you, Luis. That means more to me than you know." But outside Novatech, challenges were waiting. The Westworth family was not pleased with how the gala had ended. Rumors began to spread in the business world, whispers that Novatech was unstable, that its CEO was too proud, that the company might not survive without powerful allies. Investors grew cautious. A few called to express doubt. One even withdrew their support. The pressure began to build, and Amara felt it pressing on her shoulders like a heavy stone. Yet even in the storm, small rays of light appeared. A week after the gala, Amara received a letter from a well-known entrepreneur, a woman named Clara Martinez, who had built her own company from nothing. The letter read, "Amara, I watched what you did at the gala. Many may not understand your decision now, but I do. I would like to meet and discuss how our companies might work together. True leaders should support each other." Amara held the letter in her hands, her heart lifting. For the first time since the gala, she felt the possibility of new beginnings. The following week, she met Clara in a small cafe downtown, far from the glittering halls of power. Clara was warm, direct, and filled with the same fire that Amara carried in her own heart. "I respect you, Amara," Clara said over coffee. "You chose dignity over dollars. That's rare in this world. And it tells me that if we work together, we'll build something that lasts." The two women spoke for hours, exchanging ideas and dreams. By the end of their meeting, they had agreed to explore a partnership, one built not on control, but on shared values. Back at Novatech, Amara shared the news with her team. Excitement filled the office. The path ahead was still uncertain, but it no longer felt lonely. They were not walking into the future alone, they were walking with allies who believed in the same truth. One evening, as Amara sat at her desk looking out at the glowing city, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. She opened it, and her breath caught. It read, "You may think walking away was brave, but the world is not kind to those who defy us. Be ready." Amara read the message twice. Her heart tightened, but her face remained calm. She set the phone down gently and whispered to herself, "I have been ready all my life." The Westworth family had made their move. The battle for Novatech's future was only beginning. The morning sun rose over the city, painting the sky in soft gold. Inside Novatech headquarters, Amara Lewis stood by the tall window of her office, holding a cup of tea in her hands. The threatening message from the night before still echoed in her mind. She knew it had come from someone connected to the Westworth family. It was not surprising. When powerful people feel challenged, they often respond with shadows instead of light. Amara was not afraid. She had faced storms before. She reminded herself that fear could not guide her decisions. Only truth could. Later that day, she called her leadership team together. They gathered in the main conference room, their faces a mix of concern and determination. "I need to tell you something," Amara began, her voice calm. "We may face pressure in the coming weeks. Rumors, challenges, maybe even attempts to weaken us. But I want you to remember our strength is not in deals we sign. It is in the trust we have built with each other and with our customers." Her words filled the room with quiet power. Luis, always steady, spoke up. "We believe in you, Amara. We believe in Novatech. Let them try, we'll stand strong." Amara smiled, her heart lifted by their faith. In the days that followed, the storm did arrive. Negative articles appeared in the press, questioning Novatech's future. Some business leaders whispered that Amara had been too emotional to handle big deals. Investors pulled back, and a few companies hesitated to continue their partnerships. But while some doors closed, others opened. Clara Martinez, true to her word, announced publicly that her company would work with Novatech. "I believe in leadership that values dignity," she said in an interview. Her support brought fresh attention and respect to Amara's decision. Soon, other leaders, smaller but ambitious, reached out to Amara. They wanted to partner not because of the size of her company, but because of the values she represented. Novatech began forming alliances built on honesty and trust, not on control and pride. The tide was beginning to turn. One evening, Amara was invited to speak at a conference of young entrepreneurs. Standing on the stage before hundreds of faces, she shared her story with simple truth. "Success is not measured by the size of a deal," she said, her voice steady. "It is measured by the values you refuse to lose. You will face moments when the world asks you to bow. In those moments, remember this: your dignity is worth more than gold." The room erupted in applause. Many in the audience had faced similar doubts in their own journeys. Amara's words gave them courage. News of her speech spread quickly. The same media that had once questioned her now began to praise her. They called her a new voice in business, a leader of integrity, and the CEO who chose respect over riches. Meanwhile, the Westworth family remained silent. Their empire was still vast, their name still powerful, but something had shifted. The world had seen them try to measure a woman's worth by their traditions, and the world had also seen her walk away unbroken. One quiet night, Amara returned home late from work. She stood by her window, looking out at the glowing city. For the first time in weeks, she felt calm, not because the challenges were gone, but because she had learned something greater. She whispered to herself, the deal was never the real prize. The real prize was freedom. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Clara: "We launch our partnership tomorrow. I believe it will be the start of something beautiful." Amara smiled, her heart full. She knew the path ahead would still bring trials, but now she had allies, a strong team, and most importantly, her own truth. As the city lights sparkled like stars below her, Amara realized she had written a story no one could erase. Not the Westworth family, not the critics, not the doubters. It was her story, one of courage, dignity, and the quiet power of walking away when respect was not offered. She set her cup of tea aside and opened her laptop. With steady hands, she began writing the future plans of Novatech. The company was no longer standing in the shadow of a billion-dollar deal. It was standing in the light of its own vision. And in that moment, Amara knew with certainty, the best chapters of her journey were still ahead.